The gun went off before she finished signing her own termination papers. That was how Mara Edson would later describe the worst morning of her life. Not with tears, not with the image of Owen's face when he handed her the folder, but with the sound. A single crack somewhere below the 23rd floor of Callaway Financial Group. And then the building went still in the way buildings only go still when everyone inside them is holding their breath. She wasn't holding her breath. She was staring at the clause Owen had underlined in red ink. Voluntary resignation. Effective immediately. "It's better this way," Owen said. He was already straightening his cufflinks. He had always been straightening something. His tie, his collar, his version of events. In 4 years working beside him, Mara had watched him smooth over every rough edge until the truth became something soft and manageable and entirely his. The partners made their decision. "I tried to advocate for you." She looked up at him. He didn't look away, which was the part that still got her sometimes, even now. Owen Fitch could lie directly into your eyes and never once blink. "You reported me," she said. "I flagged a discrepancy you created." He exhaled through his nose, patient, almost fond, the way a teacher exhales at a student who keeps getting the same answer wrong. "Mara, the numbers don't lie." She almost laughed. The numbers. He had come to the right person if he wanted to talk about numbers. She had been running Callaway's forensic accounting division for 3 years, 7 months, and 11 days. She had found embezzlement in a Miami shell company that the SEC had missed for 6 years. She had flagged a $12 million discrepancy in a partner's expense report that turned out to be closer to 40. She knew numbers the way other people knew faces, and the numbers Owen had flagged were hers, her access codes, her sign-off, her signature on transfers she had never authorized. "I need a lawyer before I sign anything," she said. "Of course," he smiled. "Though I should mention, if this goes formal, the partners will have no choice but to involve the DA's office, whereas if you resign quietly, they're willing to let it end here." He slid the folder a half-inch closer to her. "It's a generous offer, Mara. Take it." She looked at the folder. She thought about her mother's medical bills, about the sublet she'd taken last spring when her roommate left, the one that ate $400 more a month than she'd budgeted. She thought about the 3 years she'd spent turning down recruitment calls from better firms, because she'd actually believed, that Callaway was the place she was going to build something real. She picked up the pen. The gunshot sound came again, closer this time, or maybe she'd imagined it. Later she would learn it was a car backfiring on the street below. But in that moment, sitting across from Owen Fitch while he watched her with that patient, unmovable smile, it sounded like a signal, like something ending. She signed her name. He took the folder before the ink was dry. She was in the elevator when her phone rang, a number she didn't recognize, no name, no area code she could place. She almost let it go to voicemail. She would spend a long time afterward thinking about that almost. "Miss Edson." Not a question. He already knew it was her. "Who is this?" she asked. "Someone who watched you walk out of that building." A pause. "You looked like you were deciding whether to be angry or sick." She stopped walking. She was in the lobby now, the revolving door ahead of her, the mid-morning light coming through the glass in flat grey sheets. October in New York did that, turned the light bureaucratic. "I'm going to hang up," she said. "You could, but I'd like to offer you a job first." She didn't hang up. His name was Kelner. Just Kelner, the way he said it, like the first name had been removed for structural reasons. She learned later that he had one, Dax, but nobody used it, not in the buildings he owned, not in the restaurants that cleared tables for him without a reservation, not in the conversations that stopped when he entered a room. He was one of those men who had so thoroughly become his last name that the first felt like a relic from someone else's life. She met him 3 days after the Callaway termination, in an office on the 41st floor of a building in Midtown that wasn't listed in any public directory. The elevator required a code. The receptionist, a woman in her 50s with a face that revealed nothing, had taken Mara's phone and bag at the door without asking, the way customs agents do. Calm, final, practiced. Kelner was standing at the window when she was shown in. He didn't turn around immediately. She used the time to take inventory. Wide shoulders, dark suit, no tie. The kind of stillness that came from a body that had learned at some point not to waste movement. A scar ran along the left side of his jaw. Not jagged, surgical almost, like someone had made it with intention. His hands were clasped behind his back, and she could see from across the room that his knuckles were not the knuckles of a man who had spent his life behind a desk. She was not going to be afraid of him. She had decided that in the cab on the way over, as a precaution. "You found the discrepancies in the Mercer offshore accounts," he said, still facing the window. She kept her voice even. "That was confidential work, I know. It was commissioned by a client of mine. He was impressed. Told me you were the best forensic accountant he'd encountered in 20 years. And then your firm buried the report and moved to distance themselves from the findings." He turned then. His eyes were dark, not dramatically dark, just the practical dark of someone who had learned early that expressions were information and information was leverage. "I was curious about the accountant. Is that why you had me fired?" Something shifted in his face. Not surprise exactly, but recalibration. No, whatever Fitch told you, he was operating on his own interests. He's been skimming Callaway's escrow accounts for 2 years. The discrepancy he pinned on you was his own. She had known that. She had known it the moment she saw the timestamps on the transfers. Too neat, too targeted. Nothing like the pattern of her own work. But knowing and being able to prove it were different problems. "Why would you tell me that?" she asked. "Because I want you to work for me, and I don't build arrangements on lies." He moved from the window to the desk, and she noticed again how little space he seemed to need for motion. No wasted steps, no unnecessary gestures. "I have 7 entities that require forensic oversight. 2 are clean. 3 have irregularities I want documented and corrected. 2, he paused, are complicated. Complicated how? The kind of complicated that requires someone who can look at a set of numbers and tell me exactly what story they're telling, even when the person who wrote them intended a different story." She understood that. She had always understood numbers that way. Not as facts, but as testimony, and testimony could be coached. "And if I find something you don't like?" He looked at her for a moment. "Then I need to know that too." She thought about Owen, about the folder with her signature on it, about the way he had slid it toward her, not aggressive, just certain. The certainty of a man who had already decided how the story ended. "I have conditions," she said. "I assumed you would. I work alone. No handler, no shadow, no one looking over my shoulder. Agreed. I report findings to you directly, not to an intermediary. Agreed. If I find criminal exposure, I reserve the right to determine how it's handled before anything goes external." A pause, longer than the others. "That one I'll need to think about. Take your time," she said. "Those are my terms." He didn't look annoyed. He looked, for the first time since she'd walked in, like something other than a man performing patience. He looked, very briefly, like someone who was solving a problem he hadn't expected to find interesting. "I'll have a contract drafted," he said. 6 months, she told him. "I'll give you 6 months. After that, we renegotiate or we part ways." 6 months, he repeated. He said it the way people repeat terms they're filing away, not agreeing yet, just making sure they have the number right. She picked up her bag from the chair where the receptionist had set it. "One more thing," he said as she reached the door. She waited. "Fitch has a second set of books. He keeps them on a drive at his home office, not cloud-backed. He's not as careful as he thinks he is." He said it the way someone might mention the weather, a piece of information, offered without ceremony. "In case that's useful to you." She stood there for a moment. She did not say thank you. He didn't seem to expect it. The first 2 weeks, she barely saw Kelner. She worked in a room on the 38th floor. Smaller than the 41st, no-view fluorescent lighting that hummed at a frequency she eventually stopped hearing. A workstation, a printer, 2 external monitors, a locked filing cabinet, whose key she found in an envelope on her first morning with a handwritten note that said only, "The 2019 Malta records are missing pages 1422. I've been told they don't exist. I believe they do. No signature." She found pages 14 through 22 in 4 days. They had been reformatted and embedded in a subsidiary's annual report as non-indexed attachments. Not deleted, just hidden in plain sight. Someone who understood that auditors skim, and skimmers miss things filed under headers that look routine. She left a printout on Kellner's desk without a note. The next morning, there was a key card on her desk that gave her access to the 41st floor. She didn't use it immediately. She went back to the Malta records and kept working. The thing about forensic accounting, the thing she'd never been able to explain to people who asked what she did at parties before she'd stopped going to parties, was that it was not about catching people. Not really. It was about reconstructing intention. The money always moved for a reason. The question was never what happened, but what did someone need to be true, and then you worked backward from the numbers until the need became visible. Kellner's entities had needs. Some of them were straightforward, operational inefficiencies, dressed up as losses, the accounting equivalent of someone hiding a mess under the bed before company came. One of the complicated ones had a liability structure that she suspected was designed to look riskier than it was, which was unusual. People usually structured liabilities to look safer. She flagged it, documented her reasoning, and moved on. The other complicated one took her longer. It was 3 weeks in when she found the notation. A line item, recurring quarterly, labeled consulting, external advisory, always the same amount, always routed through the same intermediary, was always time-stamped on the same day of the quarter. The amount was not large enough to flag under standard thresholds. The consistency was what caught her attention. Real consulting relationships didn't bill with that kind of clockwork regularity. Real consulting relationships were messy, irregular, human. This was a payment. She just needed to know what for. She was still working it when someone knocked on her door. She had learned to track the building's rhythm, who moved through which floors at what times, which doors opened and closed on predictable schedules when the elevator traffic thinned out. She knew by 6 p.m. most days. The 38th floor was empty except for her. It was 6:47. She didn't turn from her screen. "Come in." Kelner said, "You're still here. You're also still here." He came to stand behind her. Not close, not hovering, just present. She felt the shift in the room the way you feel a temperature change. Nothing dramatic, just a fact. "The Malta records," he said. "You found them in 4 days, 4.5. A pause. "I was told they didn't exist. Someone wanted you to believe that. That's different from them not existing." She kept her eyes on the screen. "Whoever told you that was either mistaken or lying. Based on how they were hidden, I'd lean toward lying." Another pause. She heard him pull out the chair at the small secondary table, the one she'd been using as an overflow surface, and sit down. She was mildly surprised. He didn't seem like a man who sat unless he'd decided to. "The quarterly payment," she said. "The consulting notation. Do you know what it is? I have a theory. Is your theory consistent with it being legitimate?" "No." She nodded. She had expected that answer, but confirmation was different from expectation. Confirmation meant they were now standing in the same reality, looking at the same thing. "I'll need access to the intermediary's incorporation documents," she said, "and the original agreement, if one exists. I'll have them to you by morning." She finally turned from the screen. He was watching her with that expression she was starting to recognize. Not quite neutral, not quite readable, the expression of someone who had trained himself to show only what he'd decided to show and occasionally had to remember to keep doing it. "Who built this structure?" she asked. "The man who ran this division before me. Is he still involved in any of these entities?" "No." "Is he still living?" The expression shifted. Something moved behind it, something she couldn't name. "Why? Because if he is, he'll know I'm looking. And if he built this the way I think he built it, he left a door somewhere. People who build structures like this always leave a door." For themselves. Kelner was quiet for a long moment. Outside, the city was doing its evening thing, light bleeding out of the sky, the first hour of nighttime traffic beginning to thicken on the streets below. "He's still living," Kelner said. "And you're right. He'll know. Then we're on a clock." "We've been on a clock," he said, "since you found the Malta records." She turned back to the screen. She didn't know why that made her feel better instead of worse. Being on a clock, being watched, having the problem sharpen into something with edges. She had always worked better when the problem had edges. "I'll have something for you by the end of the week," she said. She heard him stand. She heard him cross the room. At the door, he stopped. "You should know," he said, "that what you're looking for, if it's what I think it is, it doesn't end with documents." She knew what he meant. She'd known it since the Malta records, since the clockwork quarterly payments, since the shape of the whole thing had started to become visible the way shapes become visible in dark rooms when your eyes adjust. "I know," she said. He didn't say anything else. The door opened and closed, and she was alone again with the numbers and the thing they were slowly learning to say. The document Owen's courier delivered to her apartment at 11 p.m. on a Thursday was not what she expected. She expected a subpoena, or a legal threat, a cease and desist from whatever firm Callaway had on retainer for this kind of thing. What she got was a photograph. Her coming out of the Midtown building. 3 weeks ago, her second day on the job. Clear enough to have been taken from close range. There was no note. There didn't need to be. She called Kelner at 11:07. He picked up on the second ring. "Someone's been watching the building," she said, and she told him about the photograph. He was quiet for long enough that she would have thought the call dropped if she couldn't hear the faint ambient sound of wherever he was. Outdoors, wind, something mechanical in the background. "Are you home?" he asked. "Yes. Stay there. I'm not going to, Mara." It was the first time he had used her first name. She noticed it the way you notice a door opening in a wall you thought was solid. "Stay there. I'll have someone with you within the hour." She almost said she didn't need someone. She almost said she could handle it, that she'd handled worse, that she wasn't the kind of person who needed to be managed. But she thought about the photograph, the angle of it, the patience it implied, someone standing in position, waiting for the right moment, not improvising, but planning. "Okay," she said. She sat down at her kitchen table, the photograph face down in front of her, and she waited. The man Owen had set in motion, she learned his name was Greer, though she suspected that was also not the first name, had been running a secondary skimming operation through Callaway's pension accounts for 6 years. Owen had found out about it 18 months ago. Rather than report it, he'd made himself useful to Greer. The price of Owen's silence had been framed as partnership. In Mara's experience, that framing never lasted. She found the documentation in the intermediary records Kelner had sent her. It wasn't hidden the way the Malta records were hidden. It was hidden the way people hide things, when they've gotten comfortable, when they've been doing it long enough to stop being careful. A sequence of entries that made perfect sense individually, and made a different kind of sense as a pattern. She printed it on a Tuesday morning and carried it upstairs to the 41st floor. Kelner read it without expression. He read it the way she'd seen him do everything, all the way through, without interrupting himself to react. "Greer has a board seat," he said when he finished. "I know. 3 of the 7 entities we discussed are his. 2, she said. The third one he structured through a nominee. The nominee has a paper trail that goes through a law firm in Delaware that dissolved in 2021. If he thought that made him invisible, he was wrong." Kelner looked up from the pages. She kept her voice level. "The door he left for himself is in the Delaware filing. There's a clause that reverts operational control to the original beneficiary, him, under a specific set of conditions. The conditions are written to look like a standard dissolution protocol. They're not. If someone triggered them, he'd have controlling interest in 2 entities within 72 hours. Can the clause be invalidated? It can if the filing itself is fraudulent, which it is. She set another document on the desk, the one that had taken her 2 additional days to find. He used a notary who was deceased at the time of the notarization. Kelner looked at that document for a moment. Then he did something she hadn't expected. He almost smiled. Not quite. It didn't make it all the way to a real smile. But the line of his mouth changed, and for just a second she saw something under the calculation. Something that might have been in a different man called satisfaction. 6 months, he said. We agreed on 6 months for renegotiation. We're at 6 weeks. She nodded. I work fast when the problem is interesting. He stood and she was aware again of the space he occupied. Not imposing exactly, just present in a way that most people weren't present in rooms. Like he'd decided to be there, and the room had reorganized itself around the decision. The pension accounts, he said. The people who lost money. She'd been waiting for this. She had been telling herself she wasn't, but she had been. Recoverable, she said. Partially. Maybe 60 to 70 cents on the dollar, depending on how quickly the assets can be liquidated. It would take time, and it would require someone to take the filing to the DA's office, which means this stops being quiet. He didn't look away. It stopped being quiet when Greer sent a photographer to watch this building. I know, make the call, he said, to whoever you trust at the DA's office. I'll have counsel standing by. She thought about the condition she'd set in his office the first day. I reserve the right to determine how it's handled before anything goes external. She thought about him pausing on that one, the only term he'd needed to think about. He had thought about it, and now he was telling her to make the call. I don't work for the DA's office anymore, she said. I have a source there, that's different. I know the difference, he said. She believed him. She picked up her phone. She walked to the window. The good window, the 41st floor window that looked out over the city in every direction, the kind of view that cost something to earn and something else entirely to keep. And she dialed. While the phone rang, she was aware of Kelner behind her, not watching her exactly, but present the way he was always present. And she thought about the drive Owen had described on that first day, the second set of books, the information offered without ceremony. She had used it. She hadn't told him she was going to, and she hadn't thanked him afterward. He hadn't brought it up. She had been in rooms with powerful men her entire professional life. Men who kept score, who catalogued every advantage they'd handed you, who waited to call it in. She was still waiting for Kelner to call it in. Her source picked up on the third ring. It's Mara Edson, she said. I need 40 minutes and a secure line. I have documentation on the Greer pension accounts. A pause while her source processed that. Yes, that Greer. Another pause. I know it's late. This won't keep. She hung up and turned around. Kelner was looking at her with that expression again. The one she'd been studying for 6 weeks. The one she still couldn't fully decode except that it was not indifferent and it was not detached, whatever it looked like from the outside. The 6 month, he said. What happens when they're up? She had been thinking about this. She had been not thinking about it in the specific way you not think about something you've already decided. That depends, she said, on whether the next 6 months are as interesting as these ones. It was not an answer. It was something more honest than an answer, and she knew from the way his expression shifted, that almost smile again, the one that didn't quite commit, that he understood the difference. Outside, the city went on making its noise. Inside, the numbers waited patiently, the way numbers always waited, ready to tell the truth to anyone willing to read them slowly enough. She was willing. She was starting to think he might be too.